1989, an 8-year-old black child named Darius Hayes vanished from his own birthday party. The local sheriff, driven by racism, dismissed the case as a family matter, launching a cruel investigation into Darius's own father and burying the truth. For 10 years, that lie was the only story. Then, a house fire revealed a secret so monstrous it defied imagination. A hidden cell beneath a beloved party clown's house, with Darius still alive inside. But that was only the first discovery, the beginning of a far more horrifying secret. Before we begin, thank you for being here with us. This is a difficult story, but it's one that needs to be told. Let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from today? Knowing you're out there, bearing witness with us means everything. We are in this together. Now, let me tell you what really happened. The afternoon of Saturday, September 23rd, 1989, was a perfect slice of late summer magic in the quiet, tree-lined suburb of Northgate. The air was warm and smelled of cut grass and the sweet, sugary promise of birthday cake. In the backyard of the Hayes house, that promise was being fulfilled with joyous, chaotic energy. This was the universe of Darius Hayes, and on his 8th birthday, he was its undisputed king. He wasn't a king who sat on a throne, but one who flew. A hand-drawn, red and yellow C was emblazoned on the back of his t-shirt, and a faded red towel, his mother's loving handiwork, was pinned to his shoulders as a cape. He was Captain Comet, a hero of his own creation, and his mission was to defend the backyard from the imaginary space aliens only he could see. His laughter was a bright, ringing sound that cut through the happy din of a dozen other children. His mother, Serena Hayes, watched him from the patio, a warm, tired smile on her face. A registered nurse, she moved with a calm, competent grace, her presence a steady anchor in the delightful storm of the party. She saw the universe in her son, his boundless imagination, his trusting heart, his gap-toothed grin. Beside her, Robert Hayes, Darius's father, expertly flipped burgers on the grill. A hard-working mechanic, his hands, usually stained with grease, were clean today. He was a proud, quiet man whose love for his family was as solid and dependable as the engines he spent his days fixing. He caught Serena's eye and winked. This, their shared glance said, was everything. The centerpiece of the party's entertainment was set to arrive at any moment. Serena had saved for months to hire the best, the one all the parents in the county recommended, Puddles the Clown. When he finally arrived, it was to a chorus of excited screams. Puddles was a local institution. He was a classic, old-fashioned clown, not the scary kind, with a bright red nose, a rainbow wig, and a perpetually smiling face painted in cheerful, friendly colors. He was a master of his craft, pulling coins from behind ears, making balloon animals with dazzling speed, and performing pratfalls that sent the children into fits of giggles. The adults were charmed by his gentle, slightly bumbling demeanor. He was safe. He was beloved. The man beneath the paint, Wallace Finch, watched the scene through the carefully constructed mask of Puddles. He saw the laughing children, the trusting parents, the idyllic suburban backdrop, but he processed it differently. He was a collector, an appreciator of fine, rare things. And as his gaze settled on Darius, the vibrant, imaginative boy in the makeshift cape, he felt the familiar, cold thrill of spotting a perfect specimen. He noted the boy's trusting nature, the easy way he laughed, the way his parents looked at him with such fierce, unguarded love. The desire to possess that, to take it and keep it in a place where only he could see it, became a low, steady hum beneath the surface of his cheerful performance. As the party began to wind down, the sun dipping below the horizon, Finch packed up his props. He had changed out his costume and was now just Mr. Finch, a friendly man in a simple polo shirt. He approached Darius, who was sitting on the steps, tired but happy, still wearing his cape. "Hey there, Captain Comet," Finch said, his voice warm and conspiratorial. "That was a great party, but I have one more secret birthday surprise for you. It's a special magic rock that helps superheroes fly even faster. I have it in my car. Want to see?" Darius's eyes went wide. A magic rock? He looked toward his parents, who were busy talking with the last remaining guests. He looked back at the kind face of the clown who had made everyone so happy. He nodded enthusiastically. Okay. He slipped his small hand into Wallace Finch's, and together they walked around the side of the house, toward the street, away from the light and the laughter of the party. An hour later, the last guests were gone. The backyard was a mess of paper plates and deflated balloons. Serena stepped out onto the patio. Darius! Time to come in, sweetie. Silence. Darius? Robert called out, his voice a bit louder. A flicker of annoyance, then a cold knot of dread. They searched the house, the yard, the street. He was gone. The red cape, the one she had pinned to his shoulders just that morning, lay discarded in the driveway like a fallen leaf. The panic was a physical thing, a suffocating wave that stole the air from their lungs. Serena, her nurse's training kicking in, tried to stay calm, to be methodical. Robert ran up and down the street, his voice raw as he screamed his son's name into the growing darkness. At 9:15 p.m., Serena called 911. The arrival of the county sheriff's car did not bring relief. It brought a new kind of horror. Sheriff Brody stepped out of his vehicle, a large man whose uniform was stretched tight over a prominent belly. He surveyed the scene, the distraught black family, the remnants of the birthday party, with a look of bored contempt. An 8-year-old black kid goes missing from his own party? Brody drawled, his voice thick with a casual cruelty that was more chilling than any shout. He looked directly at Robert. I'd look to the father first. You two have a fight? You've been drinking, sir. What? Robert stammered, his grief momentarily eclipsed by disbelief. My son is missing. You have to help us. We'll look into it, Brody said dismissively. He refused to issue a bolo or alert the local media, the two most critical first steps in any missing child case. He treated the scene not as a potential abduction, but as a domestic disturbance. He and his deputies spent an hour asking Robert invasive, accusatory questions, their flashlights pointed not into the surrounding woods, but into the windows of the Hayes' own home. Watching from the edge of the scene was Deputy Miller, a young officer newly transferred from a larger, more professional department up north. He was horrified. This wasn't police work, it was a targeted, racist harassment campaign. He saw the genuine, soul-deep terror in Serena's eyes and the crushing, impotent rage on Robert's face. He knew, with an absolute certainty, that this was wrong. Later that night, back at the station, Sheriff Brody saw Miller writing his report. He walked over, leaning close, his breath smelling of stale coffee and malice. "You new here, Miller," Brody said, his voice a low growl. "You got a pretty wife and a new baby. Be ashamed if something happened, 'cause you were poking your nose where it don't belong. This case is closed. You understand me?" The threat was unmistakable. Miller, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and self-loathing, nodded numbly. But later that night, in the quiet of his own home, he opened a fresh, private notebook. He began to write. He documented every word Brody had said, every procedural violation, every racist assumption. He didn't know what he would ever do with it, but he knew he had to be a witness. He had to write down the truth of a crime that was already being deliberately buried under a mountain of lies. The days following Darius's disappearance bled into a week of agonizing, suspended reality. The official investigation, as promised by Sheriff Brody, was a cruel farce. It consisted of 2 more visits to the Hayes household, each one more accusatory than the last. The narrative was set, disseminated through official channels and unofficial town gossip. Robert Hayes had a temper. The parents were negligent. The boy likely ran off after a family dispute. Within 2 weeks, the case was officially closed, the file stamped with a lie. Likely runaway. Parental involvement suspected. The lie was a poison that seeped into the community. The initial sympathy from white neighbors curdled into suspicion. Serena would see them whispering at the grocery store, their glances a mixture of pity and judgment. Robert, a proud man who had built his mechanic business on a reputation of honesty and hard work, saw his customers vanish. The friendly ways he used to get from people around town were replaced by averted eyes. The suspicion, baseless but pervasive, cost him his business and chipped away at his spirit, leaving him with a quiet, simmering rage that had nowhere to go. The Hayes family became pariahs, isolated in their grief. But Serena refused to be silenced. The quiet, competent nurse transformed into a warrior. Her grief, a bottomless ocean of pain, hardened into a diamond edge of resolve. If the system would not look for her son, she would. She drained their savings, printing thousands of flyers with Darius's smiling, gap-toothed photo. She organized search parties, rallying her church and the few friends who had not abandoned them. They combed every inch of woods, every abandoned field in a 50-mile radius. When the searches turned up nothing, she changed her tactics. She realized she was not just fighting a kidnapper. She was fighting a system that made black children invisible. She started a support group, a small gathering of mothers in her living room. It was there she met the mothers of Jamal, Keisha, and Leo. Their stories were chillingly similar. A child vanished, a call to the police, a visit from Sheriff Brody, and the same dismissive, racist excuses. Jamal was a troublemaker who probably joined a gang. Keisha was a fast girl who ran off with an older boy. Leo's parents were told he likely drowned in the creek, despite no evidence. Sitting in Serena's living room, these women realized the horrifying truth. Their children were not isolated tragedies. They were a pattern. There was a predator hunting their community, and his greatest ally was the local sheriff's department, which had, through its deliberate negligence, given him a license to operate. Their small support group became the county's only real investigative body, a league of grieving mothers fighting a war no one else would acknowledge. Meanwhile, miles away, Darius was living in a different kind of nightmare. He was in a small, dark, concrete box, deep beneath the unassuming suburban house of Wallace Finch. The house itself was perfect for Finch's purposes. He had inherited it from his parents, and locals knew it was one of the oldest in the neighborhood, built in the 1920s with a large, reinforced cellar rumored to have been used for smuggling alcohol during Prohibition. Finch, who had worked for a decade as a commercial construction engineer before becoming a full-time clown, had the perfect skill set to turn this hidden space into an undetectable tomb. Neighbors had seen him doing extensive concrete work in his basement years ago, a cement mixer churning in his driveway for weeks. He told them with a chuckle that he was building a wine cellar, a joke since he didn't drink. No one questioned Puddles the Clown. In this professionally engineered darkness, Darius's world shrank to an 8-by-8-foot cube. He was chained to the floor, living in filth, his only contact with his captor the terrifying, metallic slam of a food slot opening once a day. Wallace Finch was a meticulous monster. He subjected Darius to a routine of sadistic psychological games. Some days, he would speak through the slot in the cheerful voice of Puddles, asking Darius riddles. If Darius answered correctly, he would get an extra piece of bread. If he answered wrong, he would get nothing. Other days, Finch would play recordings of children laughing, the sounds of a birthday party, a cruel echo of the life that had been stolen from him. The torture was designed to break his mind, to make him forget he was human. But Finch underestimated the power of an 8-year-old's imagination. In the crushing, absolute darkness, Darius retreated to the one place Finch couldn't touch, his mind. He was no longer Darius Hayes, a lost little boy. He was Captain Comet, the superhero from his party. The cell was not a prison. It was an alien fortress. The hunger, the cold, the fear, they were trials, cosmic tests to prove his strength. The clown was not his captor. He was the arch-villain, Lord Shadow, a monster Captain Comet was destined to defeat. This internal narrative became his armor, the only thing that kept his spirit from being extinguished. Above ground, Wallace Finch continued his double life with chilling precision. On weekends, he was Puddles, bringing joy to children's parties, his painted smile a grotesque mask. He was praised in the local paper, recommended in parenting groups. He was a beloved fixture, a harmless eccentric. No one saw the darkness behind the smile. No one heard the silence from beneath his house. For 10 years, the monster and the hero existed in their separate, parallel universes, their secret war waged in a silent, concrete tomb, a war the world had no idea was even happening. For 10 years, Wallace Finch's secret world was a fortress of his own design, meticulously controlled and brutally maintained. The end came not from a hero's charge or a detective's brilliance, but from a mundane, domestic failure. In the late autumn of 1999, the frayed cord of an old lamp in Finch's living room, its wiring brittle with age, finally gave out. It sparked, smoldered for a moment in the dusty corner, and then ignited a set of heavy, old-fashioned curtains. Finch was in his workshop in the garage, carefully repainting one of his clown props, when he smelled it, the acrid, unmistakable scent of smoke. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. It was not a fear of the fire, but a fear of the exposure it represented. The fire department, the police, strangers in his house, in his basement. It was an intolerable breach of his carefully constructed reality. He ran inside to find the living room thick with black smoke, orange flames licking up the wall. He grabbed a small fire extinguisher from the kitchen, its spray a pathetic hiss against the growing blaze. He tried to beat the flames with a blanket, but the fire was too hungry, too fast. It was out of his control. The smoke was choking him, burning his lungs. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that he had no choice. To let the house burn down risked a far greater discovery in the aftermath. He had to make the call he had spent a decade successfully avoiding. His hands trembling, he dialed 911. The wail of sirens was the sound of his world ending. The first engine from the county fire department arrived in under 6 minutes. Firefighters swarmed the property, their movements a whirlwind of professional, practiced efficiency. They smashed a window, snaked a heavy hose through the front door, and attacked the blaze with a powerful spray of water. Finch stood on the lawn, watching, his face a mask of anguish that his neighbors mistook for the grief of a man losing his home. In reality, he was watching his life's work, his secret kingdom, being breached by forces he could no longer command. The fire was suppressed quickly, confined mostly to the living room. But the firefighter's job was far from over. The most dangerous phase, the overhaul, began. They had to ensure the fire was truly out, that no hidden embers were smoldering within the walls, ready to reignite. A fire captain named Mike Rourke entered the house, pulling on his helmet. He carried a piece of equipment that was still relatively new to their department, a thermal imaging camera. The device translated heat into a visible spectrum, allowing firefighters to see through smoke and find the hidden heart of a fire. Rourke and his team cleared the main floor and then headed down into the basement. The basement was untouched by the fire, but was damp and musty, filled with the clutter of a lifetime. Rourke began systematically scanning the walls with a thermal camera. The screen showed the normal, ambient heat of the concrete walls in shades of yellow and orange. But as he panned across the far wall, the one Finch had reinforced years ago, the screen showed something impossible. A large, perfect rectangle, roughly 8 feet by 8 feet, appeared in a deep, dark, solid blue. It was a cold spot, a thermal void. In a house that had just been on fire, a section of wall was registering as significantly colder than the surrounding foundation. It made no structural sense. What the hell is this? Rourke said to his partner. His first thought was a hidden compartment, maybe for drugs or money, insulated to throw off police searches. But his primary duty was fire suppression. An insulated wall could be hiding a slow-burning fire, a deadly trap that could flare up hours later. "We gotta open this up," he declared. "I don't like it." They brought in a Halligan bar, a heavy, multi-purpose prying tool. They smashed the tip of the bar into the drywall that covered the concrete. It punched through easily. Behind it, as they peeled away the plasterboard, they found not concrete, but a solid, insulated steel door, the kind used on a walk-in freezer, with no external handle. Now, alarm bells were ringing. This wasn't a structural feature. It was a prison door. "Get the bolt cutters and a sledgehammer," Rourke ordered, his voice tight. It took 2 men and several powerful blows with the sledgehammer to break the heavy-duty lock Finch had installed. The moment the seal was broken, a stench, foul and horrific, poured out of the opening, a wave of rot and human waste so powerful it made the seasoned firefighters gag and stumble back. Rourke, his heart pounding, shone his powerful flashlight into the darkness beyond the door. The beam cut through the gloom and landed on a pile of filthy rags in the corner of a small, concrete cell. And then the rags moved. A figure, skeletal and pale, uncoiled from a heap. It was a boy, or what was left of one, his limbs as thin as sticks, his eyes wide with a terror that had been his only companion for a lifetime. He was covered in filth, a heavy iron cuff chained to his ankle. He blinked against the sudden, violent light, a creature of the dark seeing the sun for the first time. In the stunned, horrified silence of the basement, surrounded by the smell of smoke and the deeper stench of an unspeakable evil, the fire captain lowered his flashlight, his hand trembling. He keyed the radio on his shoulder, his voice a choked, disbelieving whisper. "Dispatch, this is Engine 4, Captain. We have a code 100. We have found a child. He's alive. Get the police and an ambulance here now. My God, get everyone here." The discovery of Darius Hayes was not a rescue in the triumphant sense. It was an exhumation. He was carried out of the smoky, stinking basement and into a world that was an assault on his senses. The flashing lights of the emergency vehicles, the shouts of the first responders, the feel of the cool night air on his skin. It was all too much. He was rushed to a secure wing of a regional hospital, a ghost delivered into the blindingly bright and sterile world of modern medicine. His condition was horrifying. At 18 years old, he had the body of a malnourished 10-year-old. He was suffering from rickets, severe anemia, and a host of skin and respiratory infections from a decade of living in filth and damp. He was initially nonverbal, his vocal cords atrophied, his mind locked away behind a wall of trauma. He would lie in his hospital bed, silent and still, his wide, haunted eyes tracking every movement, every sound, with a feral intensity. His only communication was through art. When a gentle, patient child psychologist named Dr. Lena Hansen gave him a sketch pad and a piece of charcoal, his trembling hand began to move with a strange, muscle-memorized purpose. He didn't write words. He drew his reality. He drew the face of a clown, its smile a grotesque, menacing slash. He drew the 8-by-8-foot cell, the chain, the food slot. And he drew, over and over, a small, heroic figure with a flowing cape, Captain Comet. It was his way of telling them who he was, not just the victim in the bed, but the hero who had survived in the dark. Serena and Robert Hayes were brought to the hospital, their reunion a landscape of unimaginable pain and fragile hope. Serena, seeing the skeletal boy in the bed, felt her nurse's training and her mother's heart collide. She knew she couldn't rush him, couldn't overwhelm him with the force of her 10 years of grief. She simply sat by his bed for hours, sometimes humming the lullabies she had sung to him as a child. It was during one of these quiet vigils that he finally reached out a trembling hand and touched hers. The connection was made. Weeks turned into a month. With therapy, his voice began to return, a rusty, quiet whisper. He began to speak to Dr. Hansen, recounting his decade in the tomb. He spoke with a chilling, detached calm, as if narrating a story he had read in a book. He described the clown, Wallace Finch, and the sadistic psychological games that were the core of his torture. He had rules, Darius whispered, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall. The riddles, the recordings of the parties. Sometimes he would push a piece of birthday cake through the slot, and he'd sing "Happy Birthday." But it was never my birthday. He described the utter darkness, the constant cold, the fear, and he explained how he survived. "I had to be Captain Comet," he said, his voice gaining a flicker of strength. "Captain Comet isn't afraid of the dark. Lord Shadow, the clown, he put me through trials to test my powers. I had to win." It was during one of these sessions that he provided the clue that would blow the case wide open, revealing a horror even deeper than the one they had already uncovered. Dr. Hansen was asking him about the sounds in the cell. "It was quiet," Darius said. "Mostly, but sometimes I would hear crying." "Crying?" Dr. Hansen asked gently. "You mean you would cry?" "No," Darius said, shaking his head. "Not me. Captain Comet doesn't cry. It was other crying. It came from a small, grime-covered air vent near the floor. I thought it was just the wind or ghosts in the walls. Puddles would get angry when I cried out loud when I was first there. He'd bang on the wall and shout, "Be quiet. You'll wake my other friends." Dr. Hansen felt a cold dread wash over her. His other friends? Darius, what do you mean? I don't know, he whispered, his eyes wide with the memory. I thought they were ghosts. In the walls. I could hear them sometimes. A girl, I think, crying. And sometimes a little boy, just muffled, like they were far away. He wasn't describing a memory. He was providing a map. The psychologist immediately understood the monstrous implication of his words. The torture chamber they had found was not the only one. It was just the first. The ghosts Darius had heard were real, and they were still down there. Darius's chilling testimony about the other friends and the air vent transformed the investigation from a single, horrific kidnapping case into a potential serial crime. The state police, now in full command, immediately secured Wallace Finch's house as a major crime scene, pushing aside the last vestiges of Sheriff Brody's corrupt local department. The news of Darius's discovery and Finch's arrest was a bombshell that detonated across the state. In a neighboring county, a police detective named David Miller saw the report on the evening news. The name Darius Hayes, the mention of Sheriff Brody. It was like a ghost from his past had risen up. The secret notebook he had kept hidden for 10 years, the record of his own shame and the sheriff's crimes, suddenly felt like a burning weight. The next morning, his face grim with a decade of guilt and a newfound resolve, Detective Miller drove to the state police headquarters and asked to speak to the lead investigator. He laid his notebook on the table. I was there, he said, his voice heavy. I was a rookie deputy. I knew it was wrong. Brody threatened me, my family. I was a coward, but I wrote it all down. Miller's notebook was the key that unlocked the conspiracy. It was a meticulous, contemporaneous record of Sheriff Brody's deliberate sabotage of the investigation, his racist directives, his immediate and baseless targeting of Robert Hayes. It was irrefutable proof of a cover-up. For the investigators, it was a godsend. For Miller, it was the beginning of his atonement. Armed with Miller's file and Darius's testimony about the air vent, a specialized team descended on Finch's house. This was no longer a simple search. It was an excavation. They traced the crude ventilation system, realizing it was engineered by Finch, the former construction engineer, to provide minimal air to his hidden chambers. The ductwork led them to a second, massively reinforced concrete wall. Using the same thermal imaging cameras from the fire department, they scanned the wall. Just as before, a cold void appeared on the screen, indicating another insulated space. A demolition team was brought in. The sound of concrete saws and jackhammers filled the air as they began the arduous task of breaking through 2 feet of solid, reinforced concrete. When they finally breached the wall, a wave of stench, even more potent than the first, washed over them. The scene beyond was a vision from hell. It was a second, larger basement divided into 3 separate, smaller enclosures. These were not cells. They were cages, made of chain-link fencing and secured with heavy padlocks. In each cage was a small, filthy mattress, a bucket, and a single, rusted chain bolted to the floor. And in each cage, there was a child. They found 7-year-old Jamal, who had vanished from a playground 2 years ago. They found 9-year-old Keisha, who had disappeared while walking home from a friend's house last year. And in the third cage, they found 6-year-old Leo, who had been taken just 3 months prior. They were alive, but just barely. They were malnourished, terrified, and had been living in conditions of unimaginable horror. Their only connection to the outside world, a shared ventilation duct that had carried their cries to the boy in the next room. The discovery was a second, even more profound shock. It was the horrifying validation of everything Serena Hayes and the other mothers in her support group had been fighting for years. Their children had not run away. They had been collected one by one by the monster who lived behind the painted smile of a clown and protected by the monster who wore the badge of the county sheriff. The full, horrifying scope of Wallace Finch's evil was finally, brutally, laid bare. The The trial of Wallace Finch in the spring of 2000 was not merely a local affair. It was a national spectacle, a televised descent into the abyss of human depravity. The courtroom was packed every day with press, with the families of the victims, and with a public morbidly fascinated by the monster who had hidden in plain sight for so long. Finch, stripped of his clown persona, was a small, unremarkable man in a baggy orange jumpsuit. He showed no emotion, no remorse. During his testimony, under the cold, methodical questioning of the prosecutor, he spoke of the children not as victims, but as objects. "They were my collection," he said, his voice a flat, chilling monotone. "Like stamps or butterflies. Each one was unique. I wanted to keep them." His psychopathy was so profound, so complete, that it left the courtroom in a stunned, horrified silence. The testimony of the children was given via closed-circuit television to spare them the trauma of facing him. Darius, as the oldest and the one who had endured the longest, spoke for them all. His quiet, detailed account of the decade of torture and of hearing the faint cries of the others through the wall was a devastating indictment that sealed Finch's fate. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would die in a cage of his own. The second trial was that of Sheriff Brody. Armed with Detective Miller's meticulously kept notebook and the testimony of a dozen other officers who, emboldened by the truth, finally came forward to describe his long history of racism and corruption, the state convicted him easily. He was found guilty of obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and multiple civil rights violations. His career, built on a foundation of lies and hate, ended in public disgrace as he was led away in handcuffs. For the world, it was justice. But for the families, it was only the end of one nightmare and the beginning of another. The four rescued children, Darius, Jamal, Keisha, and Leo, were now home, but they were strangers, ghosts returned from a dark underworld. They were terrified of loud noises, of the dark, of being alone. They bore the deep, invisible scars of a trauma that no court verdict could ever heal. The story's true ending did not take place in a courtroom, but in the quiet, sunlit community room of a local church several months later. Serena Hayes, her own grief, now channeled into a powerful new purpose, had become a fierce advocate for all four families. She had organized this gathering, a meeting for the parents and the children, a chance for them to be together in a safe space, away from the prying eyes of doctors and reporters. The parents sat in a circle of chairs, talking quietly, sharing stories, their bond forged in the fires of shared, unimaginable pain. On a large, soft rug in the center of the room, the four children sat together. At first, they were silent, each locked in their own private world of memory. Darius, the oldest, the veteran of the darkness, watched the others with a quiet, protective gaze. Then, slowly, tentatively, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn deck of cards, a simple gift from one of his therapists. He didn't speak. He just began to lay out the cards for a simple game of Go Fish. Keisha, her eyes wide and watchful, moved a little closer. Jamal and Leo followed, their curiosity overcoming their fear. Darius dealt the cards, his thin fingers moving with a slow, deliberate grace. He showed them how to hold their hands, how to ask for a card. He whispered the simple rules. There, on the floor of the church community room, surrounded by the quiet hum of their parents' voices, the four children began to play. There was no laughter, not yet. There were no shouts of victory. There was only the soft rustle of the cards, the quiet, whispered requests. "Do you have a 7?" And the shared, silent understanding of four souls who had been to hell and back. It was the first, tentative, fragile step out of the darkness. And they were taking it together,